Hi everybody, welcome back to the A&P lab for lab number 5 of your online lab semester. Now, I don't know if you fine people can hear it or not, but they have really cranked up the ventilation in this particular lab room to almost crazy proportions, which I'm basically in favor of in our current situation. But I will try to speak loudly, and hopefully the trusty old mic I invested in will pick up my voice in this little bubble that it's supposed to create around my head, so you don't have to put up with too much background noise. Now, at this point in the semester, for lab number 5, which is articulations or joints, and our first foray into the muscles. So for most people watching me right now, you probably have just had your lecture test over joints, or you are just going to have it within the next week or so. And right after that, most lectures probably are going right into muscle anatomy and muscle physiology. So we're right on the cusp here of probably about where you are in your lectures, I would assume. But if the lab comes before your lecture, use lab to help you in lecture. If the lab comes after your lecture, use lecture to help you in the lab, like that. Now, what you can see behind me right now is a picture that I have very carefully and artistically drawn for you. And I know what you're saying. Professor Allner has nothing better to do, and he has way too much time on his hands. Only one of those two things is true. I do not have way too much time on my hands. That would only be true for those of you who don't understand what all goes into making and editing these lab videos, along with teaching my lectures, things like that. So it's not that I have so much time, but it is true that I have nothing better to do. And when I say that, I mean this is the best thing. So you know, I've said many times that I'm a big advocate of drawing it first in lab to help you out. So here we have a shoulder joint, the first of the joints you need to know the structures from. This lab today is purely anatomical in that there's a lot of naming and a little bit of physiological in the memorization of functions of muscles. So all the anatomy, naming, ligaments, muscles, muscle cell parts, and some physiology with listing the functions of those various muscles, as we just talked about in the intro. So let me describe this picture to you for a minute, and I'm only drawing you the shoulder. The rest is up to you. And guess what? I'm not even going to label everything on this picture. That's for you to do. But have your lab number 5 visible to you. And I want you to notice that under the shoulder joint, the articulation of what bones? The scapula, the humerus, and the clavicle. What is it you're supposed to know? 1, 2, 3, 4 ligaments. Ligaments are those pieces of dense regular connective tissue that connect a bone to a bone, typically going from one bony prominence or projection or process to that of another bone, forming a joint. So I have drawn the 3 articulating bones. I have labeled them because my drawing is so poor you might not be able to tell otherwise. And since you have 4 ligaments that you need to know, I brought 4 different colored markers with me. Now, you have a picture in your textbook in the joint chapter. I am sure, if my memory serves, somewhere around the 260, 262, there's some pictures of joints there, somewhere in there in whatever book you have. But find the picture of the shoulder in your textbook, and even when you look at that picture in your text, or you look at the actual shoulder model that we will use in a few minutes, you can see that there's a whole bunch of things here, way more than 4. But you, the student, are only responsible on the quiz to know 4 ligaments. So in my picture, I will only draw those 4. This is the way we make the diagrams. I suggest that after you see me do this, and I'll zoom in on my picture when it's done so you can look at it, but it won't be labeled, you'll have to do that, so you can see it, and then I strongly encourage you to make one for the knee, make one for the hip as well. I'm not going to make those for you. You have to do something. So I chose the shoulder. Not only is it the first of the 3 joints for this week's lab, it's also, I think, the hardest one to draw. So I spent some time and drew it out here for you. So the first ligament I see on the list is the acromioclavicular ligament. The acromioclavicular ligament. Now I want you to think about the names of these things, because we do the old A&P trick of taking 2 different words, acromion and clavicle, we stick an O between them, and then we smash the words together. So from acromion and clavicle, we get acromioclavicular, which really makes you feel smart when you say it. So say it a few times, there in the privacy of your own home. Acromioclavicular ligament. But think about the name, because it tells me exactly where this ligament lives, what 2 things it connects. The acromion process of the scapula with the clavicle. So where would I expect an acromioclavicular ligament to live? It would go from the acromion to the clavicle, so I'll make it an orange ligament right here. So a ligament that runs from the acromion to the clavicle is the acromioclavicular ligament. Next up, we have the coracoclavicular ligament. I have a nice light blue, I guess it's not teal, is it? Sort of a light blue here. The coracoclavicular ligament. This is a ligament that runs from the coracoid process of the scapula to the clavicle. I know from experience it actually sort of has 2 parts. So the coracoclavicular ligament. What's next on my list? The coracoacromial ligament. The coracoacromial ligament, yes, you guessed it. What does that connect? The coracoid process and the acromion. Like that. That's 3 ligaments. And just one more, the glenohumeral ligament, or glenohumeral ligament. And I have green. This is a great big sheet of ligament that goes right here from the glenoid area of the scapula to the humerus. This thing is so wide, it usually subdivided into 3 regions, superior, middle, and inferior, like that. But that's it. 4 ligaments that you have to know the name of in the shoulder that I have drawn for you right here. Acromioclavicular, coracoclavicular, coracoacromial, glenohumeral ligaments. I'm going to zoom in on this picture. I strongly encourage you, make your own picture here of the shoulder, then watch me take you through it. Make your own picture of the hip, then watch me take you through it. Your own picture of the knee, same thing. I think you get it. So I'll zoom in on this one, and then you can just pause it and draw one for yourself if you would like to. Okay, people, what we're looking at here are 2 very nice shoulder models, only one of which would do us any good at all. The one that you see, whoops, excuse me, the one that you see on your right is called a muscled shoulder model, and it shows me a bunch of connective tissue elements that connect muscle to bone. These things are tendons. Do you have any tendons on this list? No, I think not. So this model right here, while it's nice, doesn't do us any good at all. This one does, where the muscles have been removed, and all we can see are the three bones, just like the drawing we saw, the scapula, the humerus, and the clavicle. Yes, I know this looks a lot better than a Duane original drawing, but this isn't quite as colorful, is it? You notice that all these ligaments are the same color, and they can be kind of hard to distinguish, particularly in 2 dimensions. So I'll do lots of turning here in the practice and take good photos for your quiz. But let's begin with our list of ligaments. For the shoulder, there are only 4. The first one, the acromioclavicular ligament, connects the acromion process of the scapula with the clavicle. This right here is the acromioclavicular ligament. Acromioclavicular ligament, the name tells me everything. Next up, I have the coracoclavicular ligament, which is a 2-parted ligament. You don't have to know the names of the 2 different parts, but they connect the coracoid process and the clavicle. So, coracoclavicular ligament right here, both of these. Coracoclavicular ligament. Next up, I have the coracoacromial ligament. Coracoid process, acromion process, coracoacromial ligament, this one right here. And last, but certainly not least, is the biggest ligament, the glenohumeral ligament here. This whole thing is the glenohumeral ligament. Glenoid fossa to the humerus. Glenohumeral ligament, coracoclavicular ligaments, there are 2. Coracoacromial ligament, there's 1. And the acromioclavicular ligament right there. Just 4 ligaments on this particular model. Next up, we have the hip, which I think is even easier for us to study than the shoulder. Here's why. I just have this great big os coxae, this pelvic bone, ilium, pubis, ischium, you might remember from a previous lab, and the femur right here, and only 3 ligaments in this model to know. First off, we have the iliofemoral, named like there's 1, there's actually 2. Ilium to the femur. Both of these ligaments are iliofemoral. Iliofemoral ligament. Notice I'm coming right off from just below this anterior inferior iliac spine. Remember, I say that just to irritate you. There you go. So iliofemoral ligament. On the back side, I have to turn it around. I have the ischiofemoral ligament. So notice I see this greater trochanter here. I've got the ischium bone and the greater sciatic notch all visible. Remember that for lab quiz purposes. Ischiofemoral ligament. And back to the front, the pubofemoral ligament from this superior ramus of the pubic bone, the pubofemoral ligament. Pubofemoral, I'm just going to wrap around, iliofemoral, and ischiofemoral ligaments of the hip. Here we have a knee and a very nice model of a knee where I can see the ligaments that I have to know the names of. There are 4, 5 if you count the patellar ligament, and the 2 meniscus pads. So first, let's orient ourselves in this articulation. The joint or meeting of 3 bones here, the tibia, the fibula, and the femur. Now, you may or may not recall from lab number 4, the fibula is the outside bone, the lateral bone. Remember, this fibula had a lateral malleolus on it. The tibia has a medial malleolus. So that means, everyone, that this is the medial side of the knee. This is the lateral side of the knee in this particular model, which is the knee model I will use for your quiz. And we have medial and lateral things named here. So first, let's start out with what's called the patellar ligament, which is actually sort of continuous with the patellar tendon. It's right here. It goes right down to that tibial tuberosity that we have. Right down here to that tibial tuberosity, the patellar ligament covers the patella. See that? Then we start with the medial and lateral things. So remember, this is the lateral side of the knee. So the ligament I see right here connecting the femur and the fibula is called the lateral collateral ligament. I'm going to say that again. The lateral collateral ligament, because it's on the lateral side. Sometimes you see it referred to as the fibular collateral ligament. Everybody calls it the LCL, lateral collateral ligament, right here. That makes this one on the other side the medial collateral ligament, connecting the medial epicondyle of the femur to the medial side of the tibia, sometimes called the tibial collateral ligament. Medial collateral ligament. Lateral collateral, medial collateral. These 2 ligaments are actually there to prevent the knee from swinging back and forth this way like a pendulum. You'll probably talk about that some in your lectures. Lateral collateral, medial collateral. Use the fibula and tibia here to orient you on sides. Medial, where the tibia is, lateral, where the fibula is. I also have 2 fibrocartilage pads in the knee that I can see from this view just fine. The medial meniscus pad right here and the lateral meniscus pad right there. See those? Medial and lateral meniscus pads. When people talk about tearing a cartilage pad in their knee, they're talking about these 2 things. Great shock absorbers. Medial meniscus, lateral meniscus. They're called meniscus pads because they curve under the 2 condyles here of the femur. They have a curved structure like a meniscus in a graduated cylinder. Maybe you saw in your general science class back in middle school. Medial meniscus, lateral meniscus. Still have 2 more ligaments to go. Those are the cruciate ligaments that exist inside the joint cavity of this knee. And I can see those very well in this posterior view. How would I know this is a posterior view? Well, I can see these 2 nice smooth condyles of the femur, that's one thing, and this intercondylar groove. Remember that? And it's right in this groove where these 2 ligaments live. They actually cross over one another. Cruciate, like the root word in crucifix, they cross one another. And there's an anterior and a posterior cruciate ligament. Now listen very closely to me explaining the naming policy that we have here for these 2 ligaments, the rule that's used. The name of the cruciate ligament, anterior versus posterior, comes from which side of the tibia it's attached to. So this one that I can see very obviously right here, this is the posterior cruciate ligament, right there. It's attached on the back side of the tibia because this is a posterior view that we're looking at. The other one that I can see right here, see this one that dives deep, follow my probe like that. This one is the anterior cruciate ligament. I'll try to show it to you in a couple different views here. If I move this patella out of the way, I can see it just a little bit in here. Look at the tip of my probe, the anterior cruciate ligament. Because this is the model I have at this particular lab and I don't want to break the thing, I will ask you these 2 ligaments here in this posterior view because that's where you can see both of them. Posterior cruciate ligament right there. Anterior cruciate ligament right here. Posterior, anterior. This one, the anterior cruciate ligament, is commonly called the ACL, and you hear about people tearing those ACLs. A very common injury when a person is landing on their knee at the same time they're trying to turn their body like that. So if they're landing and turning like this, it's very easy to tear or rupture that anterior cruciate ligament. And you'll probably talk a little more about these injuries in your lecture, or you just have, depending on if you just are or just covered the joints. So just one more quick rundown here on the knee. For this model, patellar ligament, lateral collateral ligament, lateral meniscus, medial collateral ligament, medial meniscus, posterior cruciate ligament, anterior cruciate ligament. Now remember, for lab, your job is to, if I indicate one of these structures, be able to name it. You will talk about their functions in your lectures if you're going to do it at all, but no physiology for these joints, just naming the ligaments, the parts. Now get a load of this thing. What is it he has drawn right here? Well, this is a lab version of a skeletal muscle cell or a skeletal muscle fiber that I have drawn for you. You have numerous pictures of this in your textbook. In fact, gobs and gobs of pictures of this in your textbook, all very nice. I'm going to go through some of these parts with you here, so it might be a little easier when you see the model. But again, as I said before, the point would be for you to draw your own picture and then look at me go through the models with you. That would make your study time a lot shorter and a lot more efficient, we hope. So what we see here is a neuron, a motor neuron, a nervous system cell that controls this skeletal muscle fiber. So where the neuron meets the muscle fiber, this joining connection, little gap between these two cells is called the neuromuscular junction. Notice the A&P trick. Neuron, muscle, neuromuscular junction. That's right here where my hand is, where this motor neuron actually spits a neurotransmitter upon the cell membrane of this skeletal muscle cell. And speaking of cell membranes, and who doesn't, the cell membrane of a skeletal muscle cell is called the sarcolemma. We're going to see that on a model in just a minute. Notice what I'm doing here is not labeling it for you. You draw your own and label it if you want to. As I said before, you have to do something. So the sarcolemma is the cell membrane of this muscle cell. And notice that right here, I have a projection of this cell membrane, or sarcolemma, that runs all the way across this cell. Right here where my meter stick is. Well, actually, yeah, meter stick. Right here where my meter stick is. This is called a T-tubule, or a transverse tubule, because it runs in the transverse section. I know it doesn't look like it. Imagine it oriented 90 degrees, but it goes across the short axis of the muscle fiber. So a T, or transverse tubule, right there. Notice what I attempted to draw in this skeletal muscle fiber. The models will show it much better. Are distinct cylinders within this cell. These things are called myofibrils, little muscle fibers. Myo, muscle, fibril, little fibers. Myofibrils. I just drew 1, 2, 3, 4 in this cell because I wanted to make room for other things, and I got kind of sick of drawing myofibrils. So I drew 1, 2, 3, 4 myofibrils. You will see up against the cell membrane, or sarcolemma, multiple nuclei in this cell. Remember, skeletal muscle tissue is multinucleate. I also threw in 2 great big mitochondria for you, because they tend to be fairly large in these skeletal muscle fibers and easy to spot. So mitochondria, nuclei of the cell, myofibrils, sarcolemma, neuromuscular junction, just repeating those names. And notice what it looks like inside these myofibrils. I get a distinct, rather uniform appearance of what are proteins here. These are proteins within the myofibrils called myofilaments, or muscle filaments. Notice that some of them, the green ones, look thicker in appearance than others. The purple ones seem rather thin, so the myofilaments, I have both thick ones, the green ones, and thin ones, the purple ones. They also have protein names. Myosin are the green ones, actin are the purple ones. And you're going to see these all in my muscle cell models. And again today, even if you haven't started covering this yet in your lecture, hopefully this will help you in your lecture just memorizing the names of some of these muscle cell parts. So myofibril, containing myofilaments, thick and thin ones. And then notice here, 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 I see these zigzaggy lines, which are actually, we A&P nerds are not that creative when we name things, called Z-lines. Your lecture instructors can tell you about the intricacies of that, but you can certainly see that they zigzag, so I have this zigzaggy Z-line. Z-line, 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 Z-line. The distance from one Z-line to the next, so right here between my fingers, this is the functional unit of skeletal muscle contraction. This thing is called a sarcomere. Again, I'm just naming it, the sarcomere. So sarcomere right here, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. I want you to draw your own, and then I want you to label it watching me go through the parts with you. That's the beauty of an online lab. There aren't too many beauties in it, but one is you can pause, rewind me, watch it over again. So what I'm going to do is throw one more structure in here. Then I'm going to zoom in, give you a closer shot of this particular picture, and then you can draw it, rewind the video, and label the parts for yourself, or use the picture in your textbook, which would be perfectly good as well. The one part I didn't put on here yet, look at your lab manual, the microscopic structure of a muscle cell, is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. I did not want to draw that in first because it sort of covers things up. So let me grab the appropriate colored marker. Here we are. I think I'll use a yellow one for two reasons. One, I spent all the money and ended up with bought a nice yellow marker. Two, in many models, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is either white or yellow. So that might help you with your naming when we look at the microscopic muscle cell. The sarcoplasmic reticulum, which comes right up close to the T-tubule, and then it extends all throughout this cell. It's a specialized version of endoplasmic reticulum, maybe you've seen before, so keep that in mind for your lectures. Maybe that will help you out. So now I'm going to zoom in on this picture. You can pause and then draw one of your own. I would strongly recommend it. Okay, what you're looking at here is one of two muscle cell models that we have in lab that are pretty good. Neither one of them is perfect, but they're both pretty decent. So neither one can show us every single feature that we want to see in Lab 5. That's why we have two different models to use. So pay attention to which structures I show you on which model. So this is the first of the two models, and I want you to notice a couple of the things we saw in the drawing that I made on the whiteboard and hopefully you copied. First, right here is the neuromuscular junction. This represents the ends of a nervous system cell. You can see part of that long cell stretching around here around the back, and then right here where these two meet, this is the neuromuscular junction. These little yellow dots that you see on the model right here are representing tiny little vesicles that contain neurotransmitters, in this case acetylcholine, lecture, that get spit on the muscle cell. So this right here, where these two cells come close to each other, they don't actually touch, but they come close, this is the neuromuscular junction. I can see many purple mitochondria in this particular model, which look pretty good. I can also see, excuse me, my belt mic just flipped off of me. I can also see the sarcolemma, the cell membrane of this cell. So this is the cell membrane of the muscle cell. See that right here, right here? This is the sarcolemma, not this connective tissue that I see right here. This is not on our list. This is the endomysium or endomysium you'll study in your lectures. That's this stuff right here. This sort of peachish colored material right here, this is the sarcolemma, the cell membrane of the muscle cell. I can see these cylinders inside the cell here, here, here. These are myofibrils. This cell is a cylinder and it's full of other cylinders. Let me turn it a little bit so you can see. These are myofibrils. And notice the neurons snaking along the top, forming that neuromuscular junction right there. I can see these vertical red lines here, here. These are the T tubules. The T tubules, sometimes called transverse tubules. For our purposes, we'll do the most common thing and call them T tubules in red right there and there. Again, today we're just naming these things in lab. I also see all of this white sarcoplasmic reticulum. Here, specialized endoplasmic reticulum that will store and release calcium ions. A little bit lecture-y there for you, sorry. Sarcoplasmic reticulum in white. I can also see those filaments, thick and thin ones. Notice the thick myofilament right here, a thick one, and then the thin ones right there. So thick and thin myofilaments. Now, the myosins are the thick ones. The myosins are the thick ones. So if, let me get my probe back in there so it'll focus a little better hopefully. If I indicate one of these thick ones, you don't say myofilament, you say myosin. If I indicate one of these thin ones, you say actin. Actin is thin. Myosin is thick. Thick and thin myofilaments. Again, sarcoplasmic reticulum, I can see here, mitochondria. And that's about all I see on this particular model. Okay, this muscle cell model right here looks sort of like a clunky old thing, and that's because it's a clunky old thing. But it does show us some structures very, very well. So let's first start with this view. I can see all this yellow sarcoplasmic reticulum very well in this model. I can also see a myofibril right here. Look at the size of this thing. Here is one myofibril. Here's another. There's another one up there in the other part of it. I can see these pinkish colored mitochondria everywhere. Very nice. I can also see, look at this, follow my pointer, running right across the top of these myofibrils, a T-tubule right in the middle there. Allow me to zoom in just a touch for you so you can see this particular structure, T-tubule, right down the middle, with two pieces of sarcoplasmic reticulum on either side. You'll learn the name of in lecture. These three things together are known by one name. That's a triad. Little lecture for you. That's not in our list. But I do see the T-tubule right here. Should it be another color on this model? Well, maybe, but it's not. So, T-tubule, right there. All this yellow, notice how it smothers, covers the myofibril, is sarcoplasmic reticulum. This particular model does not show me nuclei of the cell, nor does the other one that I used. This particular model does show me sarcolemma, but nobody's going to ask you sarcolemma from this model, myself included. What this model does, however, very nicely, is show us the parts of the sarcomere. So I want you to notice what the model builder has done, and I'm going to try to reposition a little bit here and zoom in a bunch for you. Right about there. So I want you to look right here and right here. Do you notice the zigzaggy line here and here? The zigzaggy line. Those two things are Z lines, sometimes called Z discs. Either name is perfectly okay. Z line, Z disc. Z to Z, remember they zigzag. And you may recall from the drawing I put on the whiteboard, the distance from one Z line to another is called a sarcomere. This whole thing is a sarcomere. And it's a specific arrangement of these myofilaments. The thin ones you can see right here, and thick ones you can see right there. They're both in green on this particular model. I will even reposition a little more and zoom in a little more, because who doesn't love a close-up when they can get one? Always a pain when you're your own cameraman. Okay. So notice Z line over here on your far right, Z line over here on your far left. This whole structure between the two Z's is the sarcomere of a skeletal muscle cell, made up of arranged proteins called myofilaments. Thin ones, actin. Thick ones, myosin. The thin ones are actins, the thick ones are myosins. Now we name parts or regions of this sarcomere. See this sort of cut right down the middle of it on this model. This represents the very middle of the myosin myofilaments called the M line. I'm going to say that again. Right here where the tip of my pointer is, this is the M line, which is right in the middle of the myosin myofilament in a myofibril of a muscle cell on a Monday in March. Maybe how many more M's could I throw in there? That's what I always like to do, a little alliteration for you. So the M line runs right down the middle of the myosin myofilaments. This area on either side, so it's between my thumb and my finger here, right here, from here to here, this is called the H zone. The H zone. It straddles that M line. So from here to here is the H zone. And trust me, we'll have practice, and the only way to do this is to drill and practice till you memorize these parts. It will help, this is me shaking my finger at you, it will help you a lot in lecture to memorize these now. So memorize these. M line. From here to here, here to here, H zone. An area of a sarcomere that's exactly the same size as the myosins. From here to here, this region. This is called the A band. I'm going to say that again. From my left index finger to my right index finger, this is called the A band. This, between my two fingers, is called the H zone. And this is called the M line. The other part of the sarcomere we have to know is right over here. We're just going to slide a little bit to our right. Notice my Z line right here. This area right here between my two fingers that does not contain any thick myofilaments, just the thin ones. The Z line is in the middle of it. This is called the I band. I. These actins are the thin myofilaments, and this I band only contains thin ones, and the letter I is a pretty thin letter. So this is the I band. Now let me go through it one time with you, and there will be practice in the practice section, so have no fear. You can practice this all day long if you want to. We're going to name the things between my fingers. From Z to Z. Sarcomere. A band. H zone. M line. Between my two fingers, I band. Z line. Thin. Actin filaments. Here, here, here. Thick. Here, here, here. Myosin myofilaments. Go through it in the practice, and I'm just going to give you a free piece of advice. Just drill and practice till you know these, because the way these structures move and slide, some getting smaller, is how muscle cells contract. So the mechanics of it I will leave to your lecture instructor, but drill and practice so you know these parts. These are all the parts I can show you on the muscle models I have here. I can't show you nuclei, don't really have those, and sarcoplasm is just the cytoplasm in the cell, and I'm not going to ask you that. So nuclei and sarcoplasm will not be on your quiz, but any of these other structures are completely fair game. Okay, last but by no means least, probably the most creepy of the three pictures that I have drawn for you today. Sorry, that's just my lack of artistic talent, but you can see obviously this is a person's face. It could be me, it could be you, it could be some random person, it doesn't really matter. A Homo sapien. And what I want you to do is look in your lab manual at the top of page 2, muscles of facial expression. So what you can see here is that I have, using a diagram from the muscle anatomy chapter in your textbook, chapter 10 I believe it is, I've just drawn some of these muscles out using different colors. And this diagram will help me learn their names as well as their functions if I think about it moving forward. You'll see what I mean as I take you through the muscle models. So this particular picture, strange as it may appear, includes most of those muscles that you see listed for facial expression. The buccinator muscle is this purple one that you see right here. It's a muscle that helps us draw back the corners of the mouth. A little trick that I always like to use, archery was a big thing in my family growing up. My brother was a tournament level archer. I'll brag on my brother here. In one open tournament, he actually defeated the world champion. So he's at a whole different stratosphere of archery than I am. But since I was 11 years old, I have never owned an arrow that was not made by my brother. My father, my dad, made bowstrings, sharpened arrowheads. So archery was a big thing. I was never to the level of skill that those two had, but it always reminds me of this. If you imagine an archer drawing back an arrow, where does his or her fingers go? Right here on the buccinator muscle. These three fingers land right on my face where the buccinator muscle is, and they do the same thing that the buccinator muscle does. They pull back the corner of my mouth. That's how I remember it. This purple muscle right here, the buccinator. In order, looking at these, next up we have the mentalis muscle, which is this brown one right here. It's a muscle in your chin that helps you look shocked or scared by drawing the corners of your mouth down a little bit. Sort of makes a V in your chin. The mentalis muscle. The occipitofrontalis, I can only see one part of it here, which is this orange one, the frontalis. Name it as if it's a separate muscle. Since I'm teaching your lab this semester, some people will argue about this. Here's how the argument goes. Is this the frontalis muscle, or is it the frontal portion of the occipitofrontalis muscle? To save you having to decide this big anatomical dilemma, I'm just going to tell you. That's the frontalis muscle. Raises your eyebrows. You call it frontalis muscle. The occipitalis is on the back of the skull. I can't see it in this view. We will see it in the model. Circling the eyes, the orbicularis oculi. Circling the mouth, the orbicularis oris. Coming down to the corners of the mouth from above, in dark blue here, the zygomaticus major muscle. Running up and down in the cheek, the masseter, one of your muscles of mastication. I always include this one in a face picture when I make one because the masseter goes over the top of, it is superficial to the buccinator. The zygomaticus major is superficial to the masseter. That's how you know it on the model, because sometimes people confuse these two. So the zygomaticus major is on top of the masseter muscle, the buccinator is below the masseter muscle. And down here in the neck, I have what's called the platysma muscle that's just under the skin. It helps pull our chin down a little bit, but you might think of it more when a person does this sort of maneuver right here. Everybody watch my neck. You know, imagine if when I was shaving this morning, sometimes I contract that to flatten the neck out a little bit. Think of a horse. Horses have more of this type of subcutaneous muscle than humans do. They have platysma, and then more extensive to a few of their body parts, the, what's it called, paniculus carnosus or something like that in a horse, that they use to twitch their skin to get flies off. It's not over the whole horse's body, but part of it. We have a little bit of muscle similar to that. That's this platysma. So platysma, mentalis, buccinator, orbicularis oris, masseter, zygomaticus major, orbicularis oculi, and frontalis. Now, I'm not trying to teach you these muscles right now. Understand, what I'm trying to do is encourage you to draw a picture using some colors so that when you look at the model, it's easier. What we see here in the lab are two perfectly good muscular models for Lab 5. In fact, they're the muscular models for Lab 5. Now, if you were here in the lab with me, which you are not, you would see that I have lots and lots of muscular arms and legs in the back of the room. See those? But those are not for lab number 5, those are for lab number 6. For lab number 5, we'll use these two models. one of which I call the head and shoulders model, the other of which I call the mini-me. Can you guess which one is which? So for today's lab, the muscles that we identify will be on either one of these models that shows it. Now, of course, to your left, the head and shoulders model doesn't show anything really below the chest. So abdominal wall, so on, we'll need the mini-me for that. But for those muscles that we have an example on each model, I will show you both models and provide you practice on these two different models for these muscles. And remember, in today's lab, you have to know the name of the muscle. When I indicate it, name the muscle would be the question, or give the function or functions of this muscle. And the thing to remember, as I told you in the introduction to today's lab, you are limited to only giving me the functions provided in the lab manual. So I will list those, all the functions. You can't just pick one when there's three. If there are three functions, you have to select the answer that includes all three functions for each one of these muscles. So some of the muscles listed, we only gave you one function to memorize. Some are listed, there are two functions to memorize, and so on. So stick with that lab manual. That is the thing that you must go by for your quiz over this lab and your practical as we move forward. Now let's start taking a look at some of these muscles. So we'll begin at the top of page 2 in your lab manual with some of these anterior muscles of facial expression that you already saw a quite artistic picture of on the whiteboard. So let's name some of these muscles that we see. So first off, fairly obviously, I can see the two orbicularis muscles because they orbit something. This one, notice the circular fiber pattern right here. This is the orbicularis oculi muscle right here. Here I can see half of the orbicularis oris, which goes around the mouth. Orbicularis oculi, ocular eye. Orbicularis oris, oral mouth. I can also see in this view these skeletal muscle fibers making up the frontalis muscle. Raises your eyebrows, wrinkles your forehead. The frontalis muscle. Remember, I told you we're naming it as if it's its own muscle, the frontalis muscle. If I rotate this thing around, I can see the occipitalis muscle. The occipitalis muscle right here. Now, in this lab, we also have a few connective tissue elements, and I think it's important that we discuss one of them right here. Let's move him away. So see this big white sheet of tissue that covers the top of the skull. This, your scalp, the connective tissue right here, this is called the epicranial aponeurosis. I would like you to think of that name, and you can see it on the right-hand side of page 2, the epicranial aponeurosis. Epi, above, cranial, cranium. Aponeurosis means a wide tendon. So this sheet of tendon is between the frontalis muscle and the occipitalis muscle. Some anatomists will argue and they'll say this is all one muscle, the occipitofrontalis. Others will argue, no, you can't call it the same muscle because they're separated by this big piece of connective tissue. So they'll say occipitalis muscle, frontalis muscle. Now, if I take a quick vote of all the A&P instructors in lab with me today, let's just do a roll call vote. Does anybody insist that these two are the same muscle? Who votes in favor of these two are separate muscles? Aye. So the ayes have it. What that means for you is that you will name these like they're two separate muscles. Frontalis, occipitalis, and you let other people worry about that dilemma. This is where you get the sort of wishy-washiness that some anatomists have in how many skeletal muscles do we own. If I count this as one muscle, then my number's lower. If I count this as two muscles, then my number's higher. And that happens with a number of our skeletal muscles. So it's not like we don't know where they are. The range of skeletal muscles we have comes from the arguments people have about their names. So back to the frontal view again, just quickly. Frontalis, orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris. Those are pretty easy. I can also see this sheet right here that we use to fan out our neck a little bit, the platysma. Notice it's a different color here. The platysma muscle right here. This happens to be the only model we have that shows it fairly well, and it's only on one side, the platysma right there. And if we go a little closer in on this particular model, on this side, I can see very nicely the zygomaticus major muscle right here. The zygomaticus major, you see that, sort of at the top of page 2 on the left-hand side. Zygomaticus major. I can also see in the chin right here. Notice it's covered up, but I can see it a little bit. Its partner would be on the other side. They form a little V here. This is the mentalis muscle. This one is the mentalis muscle. I can also see pretty nicely here these fibers going up and down right here. This is the masseter muscle. But I can see it much better on the mini-me model. So let's take a look at his face. Okay, I'm not even going to tell you how long it took to get this positioned well. A lot longer than it should have, that's for sure. But if we look at the mini-me, we can see the frontalis muscle quite nicely right here. I can see the orbicularis oculi, very nice. The complete orbicularis oris right there. I can see, let me zoom in a little for you, both sections of the mentalis right here, again forming a V in the chin. If I turn sideways, I can see coming down to the corner of the mouth. Well, you can't. If I turn him sideways, I can see coming down to the corner of the mouth the zygomaticus major muscle right here, and running right up and down there. Get my probe in there so it will focus on me, I hope. Right up and down here, the masseter muscle. This is a salivary gland, not part of our lab. That's the masseter muscle right there. I'll keep turning him around, and I can see on the back the occipitalis. If I zoom out, the epicranial aponeurosis right there. Notice, however, that he does not have any platysma at all here on this particular model. And if I turn it this way, the other cheek, I can see that buccinator right here because the masseter has been removed. Remember, this one goes under the masseter. So here's the buccinator right there, very nice on this model. This muscle that you see right here on the side of the head, directly over the temporal bone, is the temporalis muscle. So let's go through these one more time here in the instructional part. Temporalis muscle. Buccinator, right there. I'm going to rotate him so he's looking at you. Frontalis, orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, mentalis, zygomaticus major coming to the corner of the mouth, zygomaticus major, and running up and down in the cheek. Let me zoom in a little more for you. Running up and down right here, the masseter muscle right there. All nicely visible on this model. So if we keep looking at our nice head and shoulders model, remember he has a masseter right there and a beautiful temporalis muscle right here. We can also see on this particular side that muscles that move the neck, the singular one we have here, got to be everybody's favorite of a name, the sternocleidomastoid muscle right there. In fact, on this model, I can take it completely off. This thing. This is the sternocleidomastoid. And if you haven't covered this in your lectures yet, I would like you to think about this a little bit. The name of this muscle. It's not accidental. It's named for what it's attached to. Sterno, the sternum. Cleido, meaning clavicle. Mastoid, the mastoid process of your skull. The sternocleidomastoid muscle, right there. You have to love a name like that. Sternocleidomastoid muscle. Beautiful on him right here. If we keep working our way down the body, or at least down our list, we next get to the muscles of respiration. The diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. Head and Shoulders here does not have a diaphragm and does have intercostal muscles. Now, intercostal means between the ribs. So if I look at muscles that are found between the ribs, I can see two. This sheet and this sheet right here between ribs. See that? Now let me try to explain the way these models are constructed so you understand. Because this is two-dimensional, you can't really feel it. I can feel them, and with my finger, I can tell very obviously this one is on the outside. In an actual person, look at the direction these fibers run. This would continue all the way over here. This superficial muscle right here is the only one I would see. I wouldn't see the other one at all. So what the model builders do is they shave back the top muscle so that all we see is this division, these two, and only one section of the top one. So this muscle right here would continue all the way over to the sternum. This is the external intercostal muscle. This one is the internal intercostal muscle. Now, a couple tricks that I can hopefully teach you about these two between the rib muscles. The external intercostals on all of these models, these are the ones that are over here to the lateral side. The internals are the ones that are shown closest to the sternum. So inside, internal intercostal, external intercostal. Another little memory trick for you when you sit down to start memorizing the functions. The external intercostal muscles elevate the ribs. E external, E elevate. External intercostal, internal intercostal. Internal, external intercostal muscles. Now let's take a look at our other model for Lab 5. So first, let's notice the sternocleidomastoid muscle right here on this model. Sternum clavicle mastoid process of the skull, sternocleidomastoid. But then let's focus in on those intercostal muscles as long as we're here. Let me zoom in and you can see that it's exactly the same idea that we had with the other model. So muscles between the ribs are the intercostal muscles. Toward the outside, notice the direction the fibers run. This is the external intercostal, and I can see just a little touch of it here and here on this model. And then inside, what do I have? The internal intercostal muscle. Internal, more medial. External, more lateral. And again, that's just the way the model was built. In all of us, these externals would continue all the way over here. The externals elevate your ribs. The internals depress your ribs. These are muscles that assist with respiration. The big player in respiration, however, is your diaphragm. So look inside his thoracic cavity, separated from the abdominal cavity by what? This sheet of muscle you see right here under the lung, called the diaphragm. Actually goes all the way across. It makes that border between the thoracic and the abdominal or abdominal pelvic cavity. So right here you can see it, the skeletal muscle sheet, the diaphragm, the primary mover of respiration. Those intercostal muscles help, but the diaphragm does most of the work. In fact, if I take one of these lungs off and turn it upside down, you can see that sheet of muscle there. So diaphragm right there. That's the view you'll have for your quiz or practical. Now we get to the muscles of the abdominal wall, which I can show you quite easily with this chest plate we have here. So let's go through these muscles of the abdominal wall using this chest plate that you see right in front of you here. So we have 4 muscles listed there which tend to confuse people quite a bit. So stick with me. First, we have the easy to identify, what everybody calls the 6-pack, which would actually be an 8-pack, the rectus abdominis muscle, fibers running straight up and down. Notice that, rectus abdominis muscle, right here. Then we have the 2 oblique muscles. Now, oblique means at an angle. And we have an internal and an external set of those, just like we had with the intercostals up here. So I want you to look where my thumb is. Right there. Do you notice these muscle fibers all running down and in? These are the muscle fibers of the external oblique muscle. Right here, external obliques. I cannot see them on this side because they've been removed, taken off, so that I can see rectus abdominis and internal obliques. So let me rotate this around so you can see it. Do you notice how these fibers run up toward the midline, not down toward the midline? The internal obliques go up this way. So this is the internal oblique. This is the external oblique. Another feature that might help you remember this is from our connective tissue elements you see on the right-hand side of page 2. Do you see how you have an aponeurosis for the external oblique? That's this sheet of tendon you see right here between my fingers. This is the aponeurosis. So, external oblique with its aponeurosis, internal oblique, which they don't show me an aponeurosis for that. And then I have going right down the middle the linea alba, the white line. Right down the middle, this is called the linea alba, white line, aponeurosis of the external oblique, external oblique muscle, internal oblique muscle, rectus abdominis. And you'll notice that 4th muscle is called what? The transverse abdominis muscle. Can't see that from the front. Watch this, everybody. I can only see that if I rotate this around to the back side. Remember that. It's true on all my models. Notice how these muscle fibers run horizontally in the transverse plane. Transversus abdominis. Rectus abdominis. External oblique. Internal oblique. Linea alba and the aponeurosis of the external oblique muscle. Watch what I do every time I go through these muscles in my mind. Every time I go through this set of muscles or I think about them, I do exactly the same thing. Watch my hands. Rectus abdominis. External obliques. Internal obliques. And transversus abdominis. Rectus abdominis. External obliques. Down. Internal obliques. Up. Transverse or transversus abdominis. Horizontal fibers. I do it the same way every time. Oh, I know that makes me look kind of goofy. Do you think Professor Allner cares about looking goofy? Okay, let's move on and look at this head and shoulders model from the back side. So you can see he's got a couple removable parts. This happens to be one of them, which is 1/2 of the trapezius muscle. Find that on page 2 of your lab manual, way down at the bottom, the trapezius muscle. Somebody thought this looked sort of like a geometric trapezoid, which I can see that a little bit, you know, but it's not that trapezoidal. But this is the trapezius muscle. This one I sometimes call the I don't know muscle, the trapezius. Why? Because it extends your clavicle, helps you shrug your shoulders, and allows you to pivot your skull and look up. Maybe if you think of somebody looking at a trapeze artist at the circus, they would have to look up, and they use this muscle for it. Maybe a little memory trick like that will help you. So this one is the trapezius muscle. If I remove it, I can see another muscle right back here, very nice on this model. So see this medial border of the scapula right here? This muscle going right up, right here where my finger is the levator scapulae. I'm going to say that again. The levator scapulae. This muscle, as one of its functions, is to elevate the scapula, lift up the scapula. Now remember, on these functions, you have to select the choice that has all the functions for a particular muscle. Elevating the scapula is just one function of the levator scapulae. I can also see right back here, since I have removed the trapezius half on the model's left side, 2 muscles of the upper back right here, 1, 2, the rhomboid muscles. Find those. I have the rhomboideus minor and the rhomboideus major. Now let's look a little closer at those 2 muscles. Here's one, here's the other. Which one is the rhomboid major? Well, obviously the lower one. Rhomboid minor or rhomboideus minor is the upper one, right here. So again, just rotate this model a little bit. I can see the levator scapulae, rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. If I turn this model all the way around, I can look at the front side and see a very nice pectoralis minor muscle on this model. Let me zoom out. See, it's sitting on a bucket full of sheep eyeballs, if you really want to know. So this muscle is the pectoralis minor. The pectoralis major covered it all up, and I removed that. I took that off, like so. Here's how the muscle was before, pectoralis major, but we don't want that one today. We want, oh, see, now I got it stuck on there. I'll get it off, don't worry. I've dissected this model lots of times. Here's the pectoralis minor muscle. I cannot see the serratus on this head and shoulders model. I can, however, see it on the mini-me model, so let's move over to that one. So here in this model, on the back, I can see this great big trapezius muscle right here, and if I look at this side, I can see it much more like a trapezoid. The trapezius muscle right there, and on the left side of this model, that's been stripped away, so I can see what's underneath, which would be the rhomboid minor right there. Very nice. See it? Rhomboid major right there. This again is another geometric name for a muscle. A rhombus, let's go back to geometry class, is that weird slanted parallelogram, right? So somebody looked at these two muscles and thought they looked each one like a rhombus. Rhomboid major right here, rhomboid minor right there. If I rotate him a little bit, I can see the levator scapulae right there. Let me zoom in. The levator scapulae right here. Don't look at this one. It's this one because it has to come off that medial border of the scapula. So here's the levator scapulae. If I spin him around, you will notice no pectoralis minor because I still have the chest plate off, but a very nice one if I simply put it back on. This is always a little bit of a trick. I've had a lot of practice though, so let's hope I can do it. There we go. So here I see a very nice pectoralis minor muscle. The major is gone from this side. Pectoralis minor. And if I continue to rotate it around, see all these muscle fibers right here that are connected to the ribs? The serratus anterior. Let's do a little repositioning. Let's do a little zooming in because we can. Pectoralis minor, serratus anterior. Look at this, serrated like the teeth on a knife, serrated like a steak knife. Serratus anterior and pectoralis minor. And look just above, what do I have right here? A little bitty cute, as far as skeletal muscles can be cute, skeletal muscle sitting right there called the subclavius muscle. Very nice on this one right here, the subclavius muscle right there. The Head and Shoulders has one too. It's not quite as nice, but it's pretty nice, a subclavius muscle. Let me show you the subclavius on the Head and Shoulders model. So if we look at the Head and Shoulders, you can see the clavicle and just under it, subclavius muscle. So there again is that pectoralis minor. Go straight up from it and you can see the subclavius muscle. The last anatomical things we need to see are on the back side of the mini-me model, the dorsal side. So let's take a look at those. Okay, we're looking at our last couple of muscles and last connective tissue element that we have to go over in today's lab. Only visible on this model because this is the only one that has a back for us to look at. So if you're looking at page 2, over on the right-hand side, you see muscles of the vertebral column. Now, I'm going to have to burst a huge bubble here, and a lot of my colleagues, they'll say, Dwayne, don't do it. Don't burst the bubble. But I have to burst the bubble here if we look at the back of this mini-me. So what we're talking about is a group of muscles called the erector spinae group. The erector spinae group. A collective term for literally a whole bunch of different muscles. The iliocostalis group, the longissimus group, and the spinalis thoracus group. Now I can see the group right here. Look at all this musculature here. This is the erector spinae group. And these groups of muscles share a common function of extension of the vertebral column. Here's the bubble I have to burst. All I can really do is show you this group. Now what some people do, I've done it before, people do, they make pretense that we have the 3 different subgroups represented on this model, which we really don't, because I challenge you, show me the spinalis thoracus on this thing. Don't have it. I do have a bunch of iliocostalis, these are, but here's what you need to know for your lab quiz and or practical coming up. If I put a dot anywhere here, the only answer you produce is erector spinae group. Not the individual parts because they're not represented here. And even if they were, it would be tough on a 2-dimensional image like you're looking at right now. So what we have, I'm going to say it again, is an erector spinae group for this online lab. No more specific than that. So any dot I put on this muscle group right here, the answer you must select is erector spinae group, and they all have the same function, so that really doesn't matter. Last but not least, our very last connective tissue element is right here. The lumbodorsal fascia or fascia, you could say it either way you like, just make sure you select the right answer. The connective tissue in the small of your back, lumbar region, dorsal side, the lumbodorsal fascia or fascia. Next up, take a look at the practice video. Expect to go through it several times, the anatomy and the functions of these muscles.